Somebody introduce me, please.
Yes, I wanted to introduce Dr. Horwitz. Um, Dr. Horwitz is Gulf Manor Synagogue's strength in two areas. He never forgets a name, which makes him the rabbi's favorite gabbai, and he's an expert in the calendar, which makes today's topic of Rosh Chodesh and the new moon something that I'm very excited to hear from Dr. Horwitz about. And I'm sure that this share will be of astronomical proportions. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Dr. Horwitz. I had to start with a touch of humor.
Okay. And
In
good
honor of Dr.
Kodesh. And Achihud, please introduce yourself and your yeshiva.
I'm Achihud, and we're here at Mahon Meir Yeshiva, and this is a special series between the synagogue and the yeshiva. It's been very successful. We've had many different speakers with many different opinions, backgrounds, and it's been wonderful. This whole series came into being as a response to the pandemic, and thank God all the restrictions are being lifted. We're going to do this series for spring break, and then we're going to do one for Pesach, and that's going to be it. And thank God it's finally coming back to normal.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you, Achihud. And I must say the same way, different celestial.
Dr. Horwitz, you became muted somehow. There you go, you're good. Go ahead again.
Alternate Nate. Okay, am I unmuted now? Somebody muted me.
Go ahead, you're unmuted now.
Okay, I just want to thank Achihud Asher because the same way the celestial orbits have places of Kishorim where they bind together. Achihud is our kesher between Eretz Yisrael and Mahon Meir and the Gulf Manor Synagogue, where he was a member and participant until he went to yeshiva, and we don't know yet if he's going to stay there, if he's going to come back and share some of the knowledge. Anyway, I called my title today, Kiddush HaChodesh. You just look or just do the math. And I based this because yesterday was Parshas HaChodesh, and one of the main things that started us off was Kiddush HaChodesh. I based my talk on Mishnayos Rosh Hashanah, with a commentary by Pinchas Kahati. The topic in there was not covered much in the Gemara, but the Rashash has a little comment. Rambam's Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh. I also tried to look at the comments of Avadia ben David and of Ben Chaviv, and I have a book here which has the comprehensive Hebrew calendar, and the introduction has a nice explanation of and summary of what the Rambam's trying to say. It's by Arthur Speer, who was a Talmud Chacham who emigrated from Germany. Comprehensive Hebrew calendar, and this is the 1986 edition. And finally, I've picked up a number of illustrations from different web sources, and most of them have in the corner an acknowledgement of where they themselves came from. I'm going to have to start first with a few disclaimers. The calculations of Chazal and the Rambam are geocentric, which means all these celestial movements are described relative to the Earth. The illustrations and many of the explanations herein and elsewhere are heliocentric, describing the movements relative to the sun. And since we are theocentric, orbiting our lives around the will of Hashem, the creator of all this, the way anything is presented is just to help our limited minds understand its cosmic truths. And finally, I've used some transliterations. They use a Sephardic pronunciation, which is like those living on Admat HaKodesh in Eretz Yisrael. The main disclaimer is I am not a Rav. I am not an expert in Kiddush HaChodesh. I have a good enough memory to kind of figure out when what the different years are set up like in the past and the future, so I can have a good idea of what the different Yom Tovim will fall out in different years. But that does not make me an expert in all the calculations that I'm going to present over here. Now, when you have a talk like this, you have to have it presented, and the Rambam was somebody who knew everything and was very good at organizing it. In his Hilchot of Kiddush HaChodesh, there are 19 chapters. Look quickly at them, and we will break up my talk according to some of this. The principles, qualifications of witnesses, travel times, which are important because if they can't get to the Beis Din in time, it's not going to make any difference. And if they can't get the message out when the holidays are, they have to double up on the holidays. Went that extra Adar. The need of a predetermined calendar when there's no Beis Din. The different astronomical calculations, current rules for setting Rosh Hashanah, and the lengths of months. We'll get more into them in detail later. I could send out copies of the slide. It will take too long to read this. But basically, many of these things we're somewhat familiar with, that the months have different lengths. And there's 2 months that can vary. And the following ones, you have the various calculations, and dividing the spheres and equators. We're going to go through all of these in section by section and try to explain what the Rambam is trying to get across. But this is just something that if you have the slides available, Achihud has a copy, the rabbi has a copy that you can go back and refer to, or if you have the Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh with you, you can look at those topics. Okay, the first 3 parakim are the general principles to which I've added some basic knowledge so that people can understand what we're talking about. Okay, first of all, why do we need to have Kiddush HaChodesh? And that's based on our Parshat HaChodesh from yesterday in the beginning of Shemot Perek Yud Beis. We have to change from a season-based to a lunar-based calendar. Why? And it's the first mitzvah for all Israel. We have to require to change our mindset before the Exodus and before Har Sinai. This is one of the few mitzvahs given before Har Sinai. We have to change our mindset, and our mindset is based on a relationship to God rather than to just nature alone. So our relationship with the cycles of the moon is very much part of our relationship with the HaChodesh Baruch Hu. The next thing we have to know is that the lunar month is not an exact amount of days. If it were, it'd be very easy. But the mean, in other words, it can vary. The mean is 29 days, 12 hours, 793 out of 100 chalakim, which means 44 minutes and 3 1/3 seconds. Thus, the new moon can begin on the 30th or 31st day after the previous month. Using the word hazeh, Hashem showed Moshe the minimum crescent needed to be sighted to count as a new moon. And finally, the confirmation by the Beis Din, Kiddush HaChodesh, has to be by the leaders of the community, namely Moshe and Aaron. Just a quick review of the phases of the moon. This shows the sunlight coming in from the left and the moon going around the earth. We have over here a crescent moon, which is much like it would have looked like to a witness when the Beis Din was operational. Actually, it starts out small, and as it moves back, the crescent gets larger and also gets to thicken out. And this is important. And the basic crescent, the Rambam says it's roughly a day's period on each side of the Rosh Chodesh where it's not necessarily going to be visible, given haze and so forth. And generally, you can't begin to see the moon until it's about maybe 3 or 4 degrees away from the sun, which is about 6 hours at least, and sometimes it'll take a whole day. What did we used to do back when we had the Beis Din? Even when the Mikdash wasn't there, we still had the Beis Din. First of all, someone would go out and he would see the new crescent on day 30 from the previous crescent. He must be intending to see it and see it in the sky. In other words, if he just happens to glance in the sky and notice the moon, that's not good enough. He has to intend to see it. He can't see a reflection of it. And generally, it's best visible right after sunset. If the sun is too bright, the smallest of the crescents may not be visible yet, and they have to get to be much bigger if you're seeing it during the day. Since in the evening, he has to head out right away to the Beis Din Gedolah. He may not be living in Yerushalayim. He may be by the sea coast where there's a nice view of the sea, or maybe up on a high mountain someplace. When he gets over there, he probably has to travel all night, which is why they say that if it's dangerous, you can bring your weapons along on Shabbos. Once he gets there, he has to establish his credentials. He has to select the appearance of the crescent from Rabbi Gamliel's placard. He had a placard of the different shapes of the moon that he might have seen. And then the Beis Din has determined that his sighting was legitimately the new moon. But everybody else had come, and maybe many people have come. They have to allow all the others to testify also, even if they've already determined the new month is there, so that the other people won't be put off and won't come in the future. They want everybody to come. Finally, the Rosh Beit Din would sanctify the new month if 2 witnesses saw it and were confirmed. They would publicize it around the country with torches on hills. Later, they could only use trusted messengers when people tried to mess things up. If it wasn't seen on that night, day 31st automatically became the new month, which is the accepted halacha according to Rab Elazar ben Sadok. Okay, Perek 4, some rules for the Eber year. In other words, the extra month that has to come every so often. He talks about that fairly early on. Let's go over that. And who else is like your people Israel? It's our unique reconciliation of solar and lunar years. There are some cultures that have lunar years, but they move. You have other cultures which just care about their moon as at one part during the year, so that's easy. But to care for it all the time, we have to go into Shemot 13, Yud Gimel Perek Daled. Today you are leaving Yotzeim B'Chodesh Aviv, in the month that's spring. Pesach must start during this month of spring. And since 12 lunar months are 10 days, 21 hours, 6 minutes, and 45 seconds shorter than a mean solar year. So you're going to fall behind. And what's the solution that we have come up with, that Hashem has given to our hands? We add an extra month whenever 2 of 3 conditions are met. Now, this is when there was a Beis Din where they could do this. The moon sighting for Pesach has to fall before the vernal equinox. We'll talk more about equinox. It's basically when spring starts. If you see the moon before it's springtime, it's too early. You may look out and see the weather is still too overcast or wintry. That's kind of a hint that it's still wintertime. Finally, fruits and grains are not reached a proper level of ripeness, and livestock aren't birthing. The Chachamim would use at least 2 of these 3, putting a lot of weight on the first one in order to decide is it time to put in a new month. Occasionally, if there were very heavy rains during the winter and a lot of the roads were washed out and people couldn't get to Yerushalayim, they had the right to add an extra month on a contingency to make traveling easier. Now that we have a calculated calendar, it comes out to 7 years of a 19-year cycle, and these are set at years 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, and 19. We're not going to go in how they were set that way, but that is the convention now. Now, finally, we get to the calculations. Now, we have to be very careful because our calculations aren't exactly made the same way that the astronomers and astrologers of past civilizations have made them. We are counting the time from the time the moon becomes visible to the next time the moon becomes visible. So there's a much more variability. As I explained, it might not always be visible in the same spot, as opposed to the rest of the people who are calculating the midpoint of when the moon and the sun are in the same spot from our observation, which means the moon isn't even being seen yet. It's just when they are both on the same line. So their timing will be much more precise, and even with them, they have some variations. Whereas with us, we have to work by a mean, and we have to work by to put in certain give us some wobble room to do this. And why do we need the calculations? Well, we needed it in the good old days, and we need it now. So when it was Hashem that was doing in the good old days, the Beis Din had to anticipate when they might be getting witnesses so that they can set up their hospitality. They have to determine the earliest visibility so that people don't come in telling them they saw it way before it could be possible. They have to test the witness's veracity They have to calculate the position of the moon relative to the sun, and they have to be able to calculate what the length of the crescent would be around that time. And also, we talked about the astrological need for Adar second to be intercalated. Now, when man does it, he has math algorithms like we do now. This way we can use it to fix the date of the Rosh Chodesh based on the mean. But the more important thing is that we have to fix the upcoming Rosh Hashanah to make sure that the year runs properly. First rule of that is we have to avoid Rosh Hashanah's falling on a Sunday, Wednesday, or Friday. There are certain other rules in there, which I won't get to in detail, but let's say if the moon is seen on a Tuesday too early in the morning, or it's actually too late in the morning, if we do it a regular way, there are going to be problems when we try to calculate the following year that the actual Rosh Hashanah would have to be pushed off too many days. Therefore, they have rules like Gatrag, if it's on the third day, but after 9 o'clock and a few collecting in the morning, we have to push it off. We have to not do it that day, but we have to push it off at least till Thursday. And there's some other rules like that. So this guarantees that we don't run into problem. We have to calculate the Rosh Hashanah. And then now that we know the time the Rosh Hashanah is going to be, we know how many days there have to be. If it's 354 days, Cheshvan will be short and Kislev Cheshvan will be short and Kislev will be long. If it's going to be 355 days, it'll be both long. In other words, the Rosh Chodesh will be on the 31st day of the next month. And if it's too short, it'll be 29 days for both. And the thing is, the same is true for the 384 day leap year, extra month year. And also what's important is calculating the Tekufot. The Tekufot are the seasons, they're roughly 1 quarter. And this is a way to help the Chachamim decide whether the springtime is starting, the Tekufat Nisan is starting too close or too far behind where it should be, and you need another month. And also what we do today is 60 days after Tekufat Tishrei, we figure out when we could start praying for rain. There are some monkey wrenches thrown into this. The Chachamim didn't consider the time difference of the day length as accurately because they felt the difference would not matter because Beis Hamikdash was coming soon. Hashem has tarried the Beis Hamikdash due to our misbehavior, and therefore the Tekufa has moved forward about 15 days, and there's some other seasonal things, so that's actually moved off another 4 days. So anyway, that's the difference why we need to calculate it, whether it's the time of the Beis Din or whether it's now.
So, Rabbi, I have a question. May I ask a question, or would you rather save it for the end?
Go ahead, I hear you.
The question is at some point, I believe in the next few hundred years, there'll actually come a point where Passover, as calculated, would be observed it would no longer be in the month of springtime as defined by the Torah.
It's already happening.
It's already happening.
The vernal equinox has moved over. That's been calculated for. It hasn't posed. I mean, it's posed a small problem that the days have moved a few over the millennia. The day of the earliest possible Pesach is a little later now than it used to be, but it's not. It's still falling in the spring. It's going to be falling in the spring. But the idea of the movement of the vernal equinox has already been observed and taken into consideration. I believe that's your question. We're going to have a little slide about that coming up very soon.
My question was about correction. As the time occurs, do we? Because when they made the calendar Yavna, it's my understanding that they knew that this would be a problem in the future.
Right, they did.
So I guess my question is do we follow the calendar as written, or do we at some point have to reconvene a Sanhedrin, or how do we resolve this?
They have the calendar as written. There have been some modifications. I think in like 1908 or something, they have we have a 19-year cycle, and there's a 247-year super cycle in which the days line up. In other words, that the actual order of what day Rosh Hashanah falls on corresponds again. And in 1908, they had to move something from a Tuesday to a Thursday or something like that. Because, and again, it was by acclamation, and it came out, but it didn't really move springtime, and it just moved where how we're gonna write the calendar out as far as whether it's Malay or Chasser in the future with the months. There's no calculation for, let's say, taking away an extra month or something like that. I've seen some articles where they talk about it, but it would take several more millennia, and we're hoping that, by the time the 7th millennium comes, Beis Hamikdash is supposed to be here. So it's put off as a problem that we don't expect to see. Is that more of an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, that means that I confused him enough that he's going to stop asking questions. Okay, in fact, some of the calculations related to the solar year. Here we go. Some quick estimates.
Not at all. This is a subject I'm actually fairly passionate about, to the point that I've actually done the research, and apparently even the solar year is not as fixed as we would like to think of it. Actually, apparently the solar year even varies itself by a slight amount each year.
Yeah, correct.
It's quite an interesting subject.
The whole last few parakim are adjustments, and there's some more basic adjustments. So we'll come to them. I mean, I don't expect everybody to be an expert after this, since I'm not myself. It's not, as far as I can tell, the variations are only discussed as a matter of why there are discrepancies in the mean time versus the actual time. And the Rambam goes through such great pains that there's some calculated differences they can work on for reasons we understand. Okay, so quick astronomical notes. Orbits in circular spaces are divided into 360 degrees. So that we can know what a degree is. The moon moves about 13 degrees a day, I think 13 degrees, 10 minutes. But since the sun moves in the sky too, they have to catch up to each other. Position of the sun and moon of the sun at noon changes about 1 degree every day. Again, an average thing. That if you look at the sun today and look at it tomorrow, the constants could be about 1 degree off as the year goes around from where at Chatzos, where it's pointing. And more about these variations later. Now, according to the Rambam, the moon is not visible for about a day before reappearing. And we talked about that before. It needs to be about 5 degrees past the sun for the first crescent to be visible. Actually, it might be even visible around 3 degrees. He talks about 6 hours or so, or the portion do. And we saw in a previous figure, illustration 1, what the crescent has to look like. And the calculated molad is based on this appearance. And the calculated next molad is also based on 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 3/3 seconds from the time it appeared. And as we know, it might be a little different than that. It's not by any fixed astronomical point. And the moon itself sometimes about a half a degree in the sky, the sun closer to 2 degrees. The size of the moon can vary depending how close or distant it is from the Earth. We'll see that also. Okay, now this is just to give a background so that what I'm talking about has had some definition. Now, the position of the sun is by many cultures, and mainly ours, and primarily by ours, fixed by constellations which the sun is stationed in the course of the year. And we're not going to go through that. This is not the point of the thing, except over at about at the right at about 2:30, you see Aries, the Taleh. That is considered the point where spring starts. We'll go over nodal points and where orbits cross and so forth to explain that more. But this is basically The sun has to go through all of these constellations in the course of a year, and the moon in the course of a month, but it's not always exact on it. We'll talk about nodal points. The Earth's equator, which is the Chudashava, is tilted 23 degrees relative to the plane of orbit around the sun. We have an illustration of this later on. And the observed counterpart in the sky looking up is called the celestial equator. The equinox is the nodal point where two planes cross, with a 23-degree tilted plane that we look at and the actual plane of our being with the sun. And at that time, the days will be exactly 12 hours every place on the world. It determines the start of spring or autumn respectively. It'll happen twice a year. Otherwise, the sun is positioned north or south of the celestial equator. The maximum point north is the summer solstice. The maximum point south is the winter solstice. And longer and shorter days will impact on the sighting of the new moon. If the sun goes down earlier, the moon goes down earlier too, and vice versa. Okay, you have some illustrations of this coming up, and any questions about this right now? About the terminology. Many of you may be familiar with these. I just want to make sure that for people who are not familiar, who may have forgotten it, are reminded. Okay, and this is a better illustration of this. It shows the nodal points. The single line is parallel, corresponds to the Earth's equator, which we see there. And the thicker one, which has the names of the constellations around them, is the belt that's around them, and the ones will tip 23 degrees to the other. And we have on one side the vernal, the spring equinox, the other side the autumn equinox. And I'm not going to go into the theories why it's happening. Some say that it's the Earth's axis spins very slowly, like a dreidel or something, so the axis is always pointing. Others say that it's a matter of the position of the sun relative to the other constellations, or wobble in the centers of the ellipse or so forth. But for whatever reason, the nodal point is now somewhere in Aquarius rather than in Aries. Aquarius is the Dali. Our Rabbanim are aware of that, and it'll be very much easier in the times when we have the Beis Din, because they could actually observe this. And our Chachamim have said is that because of variations like this that we can't always predict for regularly, the rate of this change is so slow that it would be a very long time to get it back to where it is supposed to be. It will be more observation, and they say we have to rely on the most current observations that we have and therefrom. But for the purpose of our calculations, it still works. The change hasn't made enough difference in our actual observation. The calculations have no bearing really to which constellation the vernal equinox falls in. It just has to do with how many revolutions the moon makes in the course of a year, and how long it takes the Earth to go around the sun, which may vary in small amounts, but hasn't changed substantially. Okay, before I go on to this, the Rambam has two things. The previous Parakim, he showed how to calculate. If you have so many months, how do you add? It's basically how to multiply the numbers, how to convert degrees into minutes, minutes into degrees, and degrees and how to change halakim into hours and hours into days and so forth, and carry the numbers. And he goes into that in some detail. Parakim 11 to 15 tables position corrections because of elliptical orbits. As we now realize, it is not perfect circles that the orbits have, and they are uneven. And the Rambam has corrections for where we would expect, let's say, the sun or moon to be versus where they really are based on the irregular shape of the orbits. Okay, here is a picture of the moon's orbit, which is elliptical. It's only versus the size of the Earth and the moon, the difference is mainly on the order of It's on the order of maybe 5–10% of, actually more than that, actually, from 362 to 406, that's like 40,000. It's about 10% of the whole thing. It's exaggerated on this path. And on the next one, we'll see the sun. The sun is like 5 million miles based on the kilometers versus the 150 or so kilometers that the Earth is from the sun. And also what this thing shows us is that the solstice, where the orbits cross, are not the same place as when we are most distant or closest to the sun. And this explains somewhat why the longest day of the year is not necessarily the latest sunset of the year, and why the shortest day of the year isn't the earliest sunset of the year or the earliest sunrise. It's because of the elliptical orbit making things irregular. And part of what we were asked about before is the ellipse can move around. Its center of the ellipse can move around also some. Next. It's not working. Here we go. Here we go. And don't forget Kepler's second law, which the Rambam was aware 600 years ago in order to make these calculated changes. For our purposes, the closer the moon is to the Earth, the quicker it will move along the orbit. In other words, if you're trying to figure out where the actual position of the moon is, it will move more degrees when it is closer to the Earth than when it's farther away. And this is also true of the Earth's orbiting around the sun. And that's the reason that HaChodesh isn't in the same place every day, and that we talk about a mean solar day being about 24 hours, whereas there is some variation. And the Rambam builds tables in chapters 11 to 15 of all these variations, so that the Chachamim will have some idea how to calculate where they might expect the moon to be and not rely totally on just the math. Now, it gets more complicated, and Parakim 16 through 19 talk about more things which the...
Dr. Horwitz, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not so familiar with Kepler's law. Can you
Okay, I'm not going to go through all. The second law says that if you were to, an ellipse a circle has one focus. An ellipse is oval, and it's like the one focus has split and moved apart a little bit from each other.
Okay.
Now, if you take a point where something is and draw a line to the two center points, the area of that triangle that's covered in each movement in each period of time has to be the same. So when the orbiting object is closer to the line connecting the 2 points, when it's closer to the 2 points, it's going to have to, that triangle is going to have to cover more area, well, the same area. In order to do that, it has to travel farther along the arc. So it'll be more change from day to day. When it's farther away, the triangle, to get the same area, you don't have to have the difference at the far end. In other words, we're talking about the base of the triangle is the same, but the sides of the triangle vary with the height of the triangle vary with where it is, and it has to cover the same area. And this is something he calculated based on observations from the great astronomers of his time. And this was at a time also when people were first beginning to use heliocentric orbits to figure out what was going on, to be able to visualize things rather than geocentric. And this made for more accurate predictions.
Fascinating.
That's Kepler's law. I don't.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the main thing, for, like I said, for our purposes, is that the closer the moon is to the Earth, the quicker it has to move. And there's going to be, and the Rambam makes these adjustments in his tables in these parakim. Now, parakim 16 to 19 talks about more adjustments for which we have to be careful. And here they are. First one to consider is the nodal point of the moon's orbit. The moon's orbit is not on the same plane as the orbit of the Earth with the sun. The moon's orbit is tipped 5 degrees, around the sun, and the nodal points, one on each side where it meets, the intersection is referred to as the Rosh. The position of the moon at the molad, it says nolod, but molad depends on the position of the moon, sun, and Rosh relative to each other. Okay, the nodal point itself, it becomes more complicated, rotates around the Earth because when the nodal point where it crosses the same orbit is exactly the same as that of the sun, we can have a solar eclipse, and we wouldn't see the molad. That they call that the new month, but we won't really see the molad until at least 6 hours after the eclipse is over. When it's on the other side of the sun, we have a lunar eclipse, and the fact that we don't have these except every few years or whatever is an indication that the moon is not orbiting on the same plane as the sun, and the position of this goes around. Finally, the position of the other focus of the ellipse, the Earth, and we talked about with Kepler's law that the simplest thing is when it's just one focus, then you have a circle. When the foci start to move apart, then it becomes more elliptical, and the Earth is one focus of the ellipse, but the position of the other point seems to go around the Earth also, so the orientation of the ellipse can change. And this is also true of the sun, and this is not addressed totally in the Rambam's calculations, but others have said we have to keep track of measurements people are making and understand that they're not measuring the same thing we are. We're measuring the visibility and they're measuring the actual astronomical point, which make things a little more complicated. This is just an illustration of what we're talking about. You see the sun is in the background, the Earth is there. The Earth, is tipped according to the sun, plus the moon is tipped according to the Earth. And what's interesting about that is that it is still, although it's not likely, it is still possible to see the moon several at 3 degrees, which means there'll be times that you could see it as it passes above the sun if you're really sharp-eyed and can see, and it's a clear sky and you can see it. And you can see such a small crescent. Anyway, let's keep going on. Okay, is everybody with me so I can go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
and this is showing that the ellipse can move around also, the second point I made. And as you can see, this is going to make the actual calculation of the molad quite complicated. And some of these movements are so gradual with time that there might not be enough generations of observers to be able to notice the pattern.
Dr. Horwitz, I don't want to get off on a sidetrack too much, but I find it fascinating and strange that there should be all these elliptical orbits where things are not centered. Is that because of gravitational pull of other planets?
It seems to me that there is something about sustaining an orbit better in an ellipse than if it's a plain circle. I don't want to get into how the scientists talk about over billions and billions of years, things slow down a little bit and eventually everything's going to collapse and so on and so forth, because that's one of the things that Pesach is, we'll get to that later, that Pesach is totally the other side of. But somehow Hashem has not just the Earth as a focal point or the sun as a focal point, but some other, let's say, power-giving entity which keeps the whip cracking. If everybody's been on a crack the whip ride when they were a kid, that's a long ellipse. And when you get to the end of it, it whips around. And somehow the whipping keeps things going. I don't really have a good scientific mathematical explanation from it, but this is my physical understanding of how it works. And somehow having the two foci allows for sustaining the orbits as they are. Okay, debriefing the witnesses. Now, once witnesses came in, and we have all these calculations, the Rabbanim could calculate how the moon should appear at the beginning of each month, and they would ask the witnesses the following questions. What time of the day did you see it? They know how far it will be away from the sun, far enough that it's close, that's far enough that you can first begin to see a crescent. And you could say, was it before or after the sun? If it was before the sun, that means you saw the old moon, and it's going to set first. You saw the old moon, and that's wrong. But if it's after the sun, that's what you're looking for. Now, the idea of the moon's orbit being 5 degrees off allows it to be north, to look north or south of the sun. And we will see sometimes the sun is very low in the sky, which is south, and sometimes the moon's very high in the sky, which is north. And then when you get around to the other end, to the middle of the month, it's the opposite way around. And that's because of the Rabbanim were aware of the tip, and they can make calculations for it. Finally, how big was the crescent? The more delayed the visibility is going to be, the bigger the crescent is going to be. And also the crescent has the horns of the crescent, which way they're pointing would be another indication of far off the circled plane, the elliptical plane actually, the moon is, the farther north or south from the sun it appears. So now that we know all this, is it really possible for the moon to be visible on the 30th and not the 31st? I have some time. I'm going to go through a Mishnah in the Rosh Hashanah. I'm going to start with Rosh Hashanah Perek Beis, Mishnah Ches. I'm going to translate loosely as I go along. There were pictures of the moon that Rabbi Gamliel had on a tablet in his office, on the wall of his office. And there were different sites of how the moon could look. And he would go to his witnesses, did it look like this or look like that? Sounds like an optometrist's office, better here or here. There was once upon a time that two witnesses came in and says, we saw the moon in the morning, and it was far enough away from the sun that we could see the moon to the east of the sun where it's supposed to be in the Molad. That was far enough away. But in the evening time, it looked like it was to the west. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Yuri, he complained about that. He said, that can't be. But when they went to Yavne, where the Bein Beisav was, Rabban Gamliel accepted their witnesses as well. You saw it. I'm going to be set up the new month. I'm not going to worry about what you saw the rest of the month. Another time, two Adim came, and I'm going to say this is going to be probably Rosh Hashanah time. And they said, we saw it in the time when it was, we calculated it to be seen, which is on the 30th day. However, on the day afterwards, we did not see it. And again, Rabbi Gamliel accepted them. And this time, Rabbi Dosa ben Harkness took exception and says, that can't be. They're false witnesses. And there are unfortunately plenty of them around who are trying to mess up our calculations. And he used an analogy. How can you offer witness that there's a woman who gave birth, and the next day, she's still got her belly up in between her teeth and hasn't given birth yet? And Rabbi Yoshua said at that time, I see his point, and I'm going to set the month like he did. And so Rabbi Gamliel said to him, I'm going to make you come to me with your staff and your money bag on the Yom Kippurim that you figure out it's going to be by this cheshbon that the actual was a 31 days between the months, which is the day after I'm going to say. And he ran to Rabbi Akiva, and he was all upset. And he said, I have to learn that everything that Rabbi Gamliel does, you have to follow, as it says, these are the seasons of descent that we determine. And that we're the ones, someone wants to go declare it. And whether it's the correct time or not the correct time, and we don't have any other times except these. And so he goes to Dosa ben Harkness, and he says to him, if we're gonna, this is Rabbi Akiva went to him, who made the objection originally. If you're going to question the Beis Din, you're going to have to question every single Beis Din going all the way times back, and then everything's messed up because we're basing all the calculations on the previous Molad. And I'm not going to go through all, and basically the rest of the Mishnah says that in the end, Yeshua came, and he came the right time, and he came on the day he thought was Yom Kippur, but was the day after Yom Kippur, according to Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel kissed him on the head, and he says, "You're great, come in peace, my teacher and my student. My teacher because you're wiser than I am, and my student because you accepted my decree." But the question is, can this really have happened? And if you think about it, if you have the 5-degree difference and you have a possibility of seeing the moon between, it may be visible as early as 3 degrees off from the sun, but may not be visible as much as 13 degrees off the sun, and you're traveling half a day, which is only about 6 degrees. You know, if the atmospheric conditions have changed, or clouds have come up, or it's more hazy, or whatever, it is possible that the person saw the moon on the 30th day, but not the 31st day. And also, by the position of the crescent, it might have been I can't explain as well why they saw it in the east in the morning, in the west in the afternoon, except to say that somehow, and I think the Rishash tries to go into that it was in the south. It was in the southeast corner, and somehow that it was able to look that way, but nobody goes into detail of that. The point being is that there is some variation when you are seeing. We have to accept it. Now, what happened this month? Let's do a quiz for all you. The Moed was last evening in Yerushalayim, 7 p.m., 7 hours, 7 o'clock, 3 minutes and 15 and 2/3 seconds p.m. And I believe sunset in Yerushalayim was probably more like around between 5 and 5:30, if I'm not mistaken. And what do you think would have happened in the Beit Din this month? Do you think somebody would have seen the Molad tonight? Could he possibly have seen it early this morning? Or is he not going to be able to see it until after the sun goes down tonight? Is he going to be able to make it to Beit Din in time? Where is he up? Is he up in Mount Hermon, or is he on Tel Aviv on the seacoast where he has no obstructive view? Where is he? Can he get up to the Beit Din in time? And under these circumstances, is it possible that people would not have seen the moon until this evening, and they went over to or early, or even they saw it they couldn't have seen it last evening. They may not have seen it much later. You think they would have gotten to the Beit Din in time? They have to declare it. Well, it's still daytime. You think it's possible that the Beit Din, even though we have a calculated Rosh Chodesh now, today, maybe the Beit Din would have had to calculate it that it's a full month by default and made it till tomorrow. It seems rather upsetting, but really not, because if you look back a month or forward a month, it actually fell down in the same days, that somehow these things will average out. And that's the point the Rambam makes, mainly in chapter 18. But he makes the point that things will average out, but we are going by the sightings. Finally, some concluding thoughts on HaChodesh is that we had to get, as I said before, the mindset of being connected to Hashem through the cycles of the moon and the declaring of the holidays, and not just the cycle of nature, which most other nations had to do. But there's more to it. That Lachem Rosh Chodeshim, you, Israel, us, we have become the new head of the world, the new paradigm, how the world operates. What changed with Yetzias Mitzrayim? Before Yetzias Mitzrayim, everything was total exact calculations. One country went and conquered another country, took their people as slaves. And then some other country conquered that country. They became the slaves, and just goes around in cycles and cycles. This one of being slaves and masters. And when you were a slave in Mitzrayim, if you were the pharaoh, your vice pharaoh was your total slave. The head of the department under the vice pharaoh was the vice pharaoh's slave, and he was his total master and total. And this was no longer the case once Bnei Yisrael were able to escape from Mitzrayim. Everybody had a direct connection to Hashem, and mastership and servitude were more a matter of economic considerations. And finally, the moving of history. History just went around in cycles. This guy conquered that guy conquered that guy, and so forth. But now it's not the circle of history, it's the spiral of history. We are able to progress through time and come to new levels now that we're out of Mitzrayim and we're serving Hashem, and we are progressing on our road to history, which isn't just big bangs and black holes where things go back to the origin, start where they were, but things where we go from the creation of the earth to the Olam Haba and Binyan Beis Hamikdash, B'mihira b'yameinu, Amen.
Amen.
4 questions, 4 minutes for
Amen.
questions.
Man, Tadar Rabo, doctor. Very nice.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Horwitz. That was fascinating. A lot of filling in gaps in my knowledge of
Yeah, it
HaChodesh.
also makes it much easier to plod through the Rambam, knowing that he's just basically putting out a table. And I'm sure people have taken his made charts. I mean, it's not much different than the naval chart we have to tell us, when sunrise and sunset are each day that we base our calendars on. But what the Rambam is doing is showing all the deviations, not just in the solar calendar, but in the lunar calendar, and how they have to join up together to decide when we're doing it. And then the important point here is it's much different. There's a lot of wiggle room when you're setting the months up by sightings, and that's why the mathematical things are considered legitimate, because they're all within the wiggle room, even though sometimes you might be declaring it a day later than might be on this calendar, or you have to push off the actual date of Rosh Hashanah so that there is a more even and more predictable passing of the months. But in the end, it all averages out to where we need to be. And even with the movement of the constellations and so forth, and even with the very slow wobble of the ellipses, it doesn't make that much difference with the calculations, and it will all even out. But what's more important is when it comes time to make the observations again in the Basin, we'll be able to take in all the new discrepancies also. These discrepancies are on the orders of, chalakim and fractions of chalakim. So they're not huge differences, but just enough that it may make a difference in the right time between one day or the other day.
Fantastic. Wow. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Horwitz. I really appreciate
Okay, good
the
Chodesh.
time that you put into preparing this and presenting it.
Yeah,
Thank you very
Tadar.
much, Rabbi.
And the PowerPoint was wonderful. It was just so helpful.
If anybody's got any questions, we got about 15 more minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I'll give myself 15 more minutes also.
No, it's fine because we have to dive in our Arvit. I'm just saying, we got about 15 more minutes before we have to go. If anyone's got
Okay.
any questions.
I mean, if you have questions, I'm willing to hang around as long as some questions and I can answer them. Again, I am a balabas. Baruch Hashem, I have been able to kind of pick out from different texts items that other people may not be as familiar with and be able to hand them over, but I am not going to be poskening anything. I can't go into all the intricacies. I am really not an expert in all these things. I have, like I said, I do have, Baruch Hashem, a memory enough to know